Sonnet Insurance wants to know, what would you do with an extra hour in your day and more money in your pocket? With Sonnet, you can quote and buy home and auto insurance online or over the phone. Your choice, on your time, whatever works best for you. And Canadian University and college alumni could save over $2,000 a year. That's real money back where it belongs. Save time, save money, save yourself from the way insurance used to be. Get your quote at sonnet.ca. Switch, save, simple, Sonnet.
Big news, Swab is now available in Canada. Deodorants that deliver 48-hour sweat and odor protection, and body washes infused with hydrating glycerin and vitamin E. Find your favorite Swab scents and take them home for just $3.97, now exclusively at Walmart.
Welcome to Planet Fitness, aka Planet Strength, Planet Sweat, Planet Calm, Planet Social, Planet Me Time, and of course, Planet Value. Whatever you're here for, we're here for it. Judgment free.
Get started with 25 cents enrollment and then $15 a month. $49 annual fee applies. Deal ends June 12th.
The views expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Saga 960 AM or its management.
Welcome back to another episode of Tips to Appeal Crime Stoppers, only on Saga 960 AM. I'm your host, Julia Vellucci, and we're beginning the month of June, turning our attention to an issue that affects countless families, communities, and older adults all across Canada. Yet it remains often hidden behind closed doors. June, if you guys aren't aware of, is recognized as Elder Abuse Awareness Month, which is a time dedicated to raising awareness about the challenges that many seniors face. And it encourages conversations like the one we're going to have today about safety, dignity, respect, and protection as people age. When many people hear the word elder abuse, they often imagine obvious warning signs like physical harm, neglect, or even financial fraud that's committed by a stranger. Unfortunately, reality is often far more complicated than this, and it can be very difficult to spot at times. In many cases, elder abuse, it doesn't look like abuse at all. It can happen quietly, it can happen gradually, and sometimes it can happen within relationships that are built on trust, care, and good intentions. That's part of what makes these situations so tough, so difficult to recognize. As people age, life often brings significant transitions. Health needs may change, living arrangements may change, and even financial responsibilities may shift. Family members become caregivers, adult children may become more involved in helping parents make super important decisions. While many families navigate these changes with compassion and respect, these transitions can also create some situations where power dynamics begin to shift. And sometimes those shifts happen intentionally. Other times they happen without anyone even realizing it. A senior may begin relying more heavily on a family member. May it be for transportation, maybe they don't drive anymore, or finances, or for healthcare appointments, or even for daily tasks. A caregiver may start to take on more responsibilities. This means that the senior's children may begin discussing future plans like housing decisions, legal documents, or even healthcare arrangements. These conversations are often rooted in concern and a desire for help. But they can also create some situations where a senior's voice often becomes smaller, or even in some cases, sadly invisible, where choices begin to be made on their behalf rather than with them, with their voice included in the decision, their opinion to be heard, and where independence can gradually be replaced by dependency. One of the challenges surrounding elder abuse awareness is understanding that harm doesn't always involve a malicious intent. Not every situation begins with someone trying to take advantage of a vulnerable older adult. Sometimes it can begin with stress, other times it begins with family conflict, and sometimes it even begins with assumptions about what is best for this person. It can begin with people making decisions quickly during difficult circumstances as well. So today's conversation, it's going to focus on many of these gray areas. The situations that don't always fit neatly into legal definitions or fit neatly into a specific box. The situations that can be difficult for families to recognize, and the situations where a senior's dignity and independence may slowly start to disappear. We'll be discussing why elder abuse doesn't always look the way that people expect it to look like. We'll also explore how isolation can impact older adults and why social connection is so important for both the safety and well-being of a senior. We're going to talk about what happens when seniors are excluded from conversations about their own lives, finances, healthcare, or even future plans. And we'll also be discussing why withholding information, overriding their choices, or making decisions without a meaningful impact can have life-lasting consequences. We'll also examine the reality that caregiving can be complicated. Families are often trying to do their best under difficult circumstances. Many caregivers are balancing careers, children, financial pressures, and caregiving responsibilities all at once. That emotional toll, it can be significant. The stress can be overwhelming. And when people become exhausted, burnout, it can begin affecting the quality of care they provide and even their decision making as well. Caregiver burnout is something that doesn't receive enough attention. Many caregivers might feel guilty discussing it. They may feel pressure to always be patient, to always be available, and to always have the answers. But unfortunately, we're all human at the end of the day. Nobody's perfect, and caregiving is demanding work. Without support, resources, and opportunities to recharge, stress can build over time. And when that happens, neglect can sometimes develop unintentionally. Not because somebody doesn't care, but because they too are struggling themselves. Maybe they don't have any time to really take care of themselves or take that time to check in and ask themselves how they're doing, which ultimately, it's going to affect how they take care of and look after others, which we've touched on a lot of that aspect last month when we were discussing mental health. Because at the end of the day, if you can't take care of your well-being and how you're feeling and regulate that, realistically, you're not going to be the most positive presence to be around other people. And you can't expect to look out for others if you can't look out for yourself. Another important topic we're going to discuss today is family dynamics. Because when aging parents require more support, long-standing family relationships often become part of this equation. Old conflicts can resurface. Lots of sibling disagreements they can emerge, and it's almost natural too with things like this because everybody's going to have different opinions about care involving their parents, which can often create tension. And in some situations, family members, they might find themselves competing for influence over these important decisions. There will be questions about housing, about healthcare, finances, about legal authority, and about questions about who knows best. All of these issues, they can create significant stress for families. Unfortunately, they can also place seniors in the middle of conflicts that affect their ability to have their own wishes to be both heard and respected. One of the most vulnerable periods in a senior's life, it often occurs during times of transition. A hospitalization, a medical diagnosis, a fall, a move into assisted living, a change in health status. These moments, they often require quick decisions. Families could be overwhelmed, emotions might be running high. And because decisions need to be made fairly quickly, there can be less time to fully consider what the senior or the older adult wants. In some situations, seniors may feel as though decisions are happening around them rather than with them. Their voice, it may become secondary to urgency because everything's moving quickly at the same time. Their preferences could be overlooked and their sense of control can begin to diminish. At Crime Stoppers, prevention is about more than responding after harm occurs. It's about awareness and it's about education. It's also about helping people recognize risks before situations even have the chance to escalate. So this philosophy, it applies to elder abuse prevention as much as it does to other public safety issues. The more people understand the warning signs, the more equipped they are to recognize when something's not right. It's also important to remember that seniors have rights. They have the right to dignity, they have the right to information, they have the right to make decisions whenever they're capable of doing so. They have the right to participate in conversations that directly affect their lives. Those rights, they do not disappear simply because somebody's getting older. We'll also discuss topics like power of attorney, choosing trusted decision makers, and why it's so important for older adults to remain involved in planning for their future. These conversations, they may not always be easy, but having them early on, that's what prevents conflict, confusion, and even vulnerability later. Today, we're going to have a phenomenal guest on who is going to go into way more detail than I am right now, as I'm just touching surface level on these issues that we'll be discussing today. We're going to have on Amy Friesen. She is the founder of Tea and Toast. She's a best-selling author, educator, and speaker, and she's even one of Canada's leading experts in helping seniors and families navigate how complex elder care and senior living can be. For over 2 decades, Amy has worked closely with seniors and caregivers, helping them understand their options, navigate major life transitions, as well as make informed decisions during some of life's most challenging or difficult moments. Through her work, she has supported thousands of seniors and families while becoming a respected voice on aging, caregiving, and elder care all across Canada. So today's conversation is not about creating fear, it's about creating awareness. Because elder abuse prevention, it's not only about recognizing obvious signs of harm. It's also about understanding the subtle ways seniors can lose their voice, their independence, and their ability to participate in decisions that affect their lives. It's about supporting caregivers, strengthening families, and it's about ensuring that older adults continue to be treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. But before we get to our conversation with Amy, I want to remind you guys of where you can find Peel Crime Stoppers. We're on Facebook and on Instagram at Peel Crime Stoppers or on X at Peel Crime Stop with 2 Ps. For volunteer or sponsorship opportunities, upcoming events, or archived podcasts, or to even make a donation, you can feel free to visit peelcrimestoppers.ca. And remember, you can always submit an anonymous tip directly through our website, the P3 app, or by calling 1-800-222-TIPS. That's 8477 to make an anonymous tip. We're going to take a brief break, but when we return, we're going to get this conversation started with Amy right after this.
Stream us live at saga960am.ca.
Welcome back to Tips by Peel Crime Stoppers, only on Saga 960 AM. We're going to get this conversation started on elder abuse with Amy Friesen. She's the founder of Tea and Toast. She's also a best-selling author, educator, speaker, and one of Canada's leading experts in helping our seniors and their families navigate how complex the elder care and senior living can be. So let's get to it. Welcome to Tips by Peel Crime Stoppers. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Amy. How are you doing?
I'm good, Julia. How are you?
That's good. Yeah, doing good as well. Thanks. I wanted to just get this conversation started by having you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your expertise.
Yeah, sure. So I am an elder care strategist, and I have been in the field for 21 years. And so what that means is really I help families and seniors make educated choices about next steps in elder care. So whether that's planning and what that looks like to stay home and who they should call and different pieces like that, but also education on retirement living, long-term care, and then if they're moving, also helping them with that, because I used to work in the retirement industry and I had a lot of families and single seniors come in very overwhelmed. And because I'm in Ottawa, there's a lot of retirement homes in Ottawa. And so there needed to be a simpler way for people to sort out everything. And really, we do that for people, but the number one is education, because it can be a very overwhelming life step and often in crisis. And so the more we can educate people, we're hoping the better off they'll be to make these decisions.
Yeah, of course. That's amazing. That's incredible work you do. You should be so proud. We need more people like you, so that's great.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. And I have a whole team here run Tea and Toast in Ottawa. and I run Eldercare Planners of Canada, which is a Canadian membership of eldercare planning companies like ours that I've strung together so that we can help families in different provinces and expand our membership that way, so that we can also have some guardrails on the industry, because the industry is really new still, and that way we all can rise together and create this industry that's respectful of seniors and making sure that we're, having proper insurances and things like that, so that everybody's at a higher standard.
Yeah, of course. Makes complete sense. That's awesome. And I just kind of wanted to touch on the term, you mentioned this briefly before, elder abuse. When people hear that term, they often picture physical harm. But abuse, it can be much more subtle than just physical harm. I wanted you to just kind of tell our listeners a little bit about that. Like, what are the forms of abuse or mistreatment that families and communities, they might not immediately recognize?
Yeah, it's similar in the fact that, like, in a dysfunctional family type of scenario too, like, it's a similar type of abuse. Emotional abuse can be happening, manipulation, intimidation, even isolation can be happening. And so it's often overlooked because it's quiet, because it's inside the family, it's inside the doors. And so people don't really readily see it until and if it gets to a crisis breaking point. And that usually often, somebody ends up in hospital or somebody ends up in real trouble. And so it's just a very quiet type of abuse. Financial abuse is also something that happens quite a lot as well, like pressuring to sign documents, changing wills, POAs, different things like that. We've seen a number of families kind of get into the sticky situation where it's kind of presented as best wishes and trying to help, the loved one. But really, sometimes the financial abuse, it's really like, how do I maneuver this so that the money at the end of the day comes to me, right? So we see that as well, unfortunately.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible, because you would think at that kind of age, they would have more of maybe a better support system to just kind of help take care of them, and people are trying to take advantage of them. That is terrible.
Yeah, it's really tough to see. And it's specifically hard when the individual may have dementia as well, right? So it's like they're not quite there to make those decisions. And so getting other family members involved and getting that information to the other family members, if say it's like one person doing that, it's just really tricky in general, because it's kind of like a sort of a he said, she said. You have to kind of prove it, or you have to kind of be able to have enough information around it so they can see it. And then it's sort of like when people wonder about what is a crisis, right? They don't know what a crisis looks like. And so when stuff like this is happening behind the scenes, it's like, how much of it's happening and like how imminent is like the danger of it. And they're trying to gauge without stepping on toes, because it could be their own siblings doing it, right? So, without lighting everything on fire, right? And say like, oh, everything's terrible. You want to make sure that before you accuse people, right? That's proper information. So people are a bit sticky.
For sure. And what about, I was also wondering, isolation. Does it play a huge factor in this as well? Because I would assume as somebody gets older, maybe especially if they're in a retirement home or a nursing home, they might kind of be isolated from their family. And maybe their family might think they can make their decisions because they're by themselves now. I'm going to take care of them. Whatever that might mean to them at the end of the day. Taking care of them could also mean manipulating them to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen a lot of isolation. I mean, I do see it in the retirement homes and long-term care homes, but I see a lot more of it in the community, because in a residence, yes, very much, they can be isolated, but there's also the built-in staff support and things like that. So it's not, I don't want to say it's as bad, because that's not the proper terminology, but it's more managed, maybe, is that kind of, and so in the community, the isolation is really a problem. We had a family at one point where the son had moved in with the mother and her care declined, but he wouldn't let anybody in for helping, right? And like she had dementia, and so it just got worse. And so the isolation in general, it removes connection. Even if they're on their own, isolation can come from not being mobile enough, not being able to get out, and then all of that kind of diminishes. So it's having that extra support to get the person socialized, really. And then in situations where they are being isolated, it sort of comes into that family dynamic again, right? That control dynamic. The person may be in over their head and they don't know what to do, but like sometimes shame and embarrassment kind of come in there too. And like, if things have gotten too far, they'll be judged maybe or whatnot for speaking out. So they just kind of leave it and let it keep going, which is kind of a lot of the ways people make decisions in elder care as it is. They just kind of leave it until it gets too bad and they have to deal with it, which is really like the opposite of what we want them to be doing, because more planning gives us more variability on solutions.
Yeah, of course. You couldn't have said that any better. And are there any warning signs with this, or even kind of in general, that maybe a senior might be losing their independence or even their voice within their own family dynamic?
Yeah, sometimes you see them stop speaking for themselves. So sometimes they're deferring to a family member. So for instance, if they're touring for a retirement home and they're being asked questions by the salesperson, for instance, if they're quiet and they're just kind of looking to their child, for instance, to answer, that might be one of the signs that they're not speaking up. Or if they appear anxious about like disagreeing and not wanting to like rock that boat, those are also kind of warning signs. And then they also sometimes, if they're asked a question, they may defer and say, well, what do you want? What do you think? Instead of answering for themselves. And that could be for a number of reasons, but really it's like, it is a warning sign, and it's really more that things have changed behind the dynamic. And it could be like that for a while, or it could be new and maybe they're unsure. And that's to be looked at as well, because they might not know enough about, retirement living, elder care, all this stuff. And they might be really unsure, but a lot of the times it's also that they're just like deferring over so that maybe they don't say the wrong thing, for instance.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that. That makes sense as well, especially if maybe English isn't their first language. And sometimes as people get older, even if they do speak English, they might, especially with dementia, they might go back to that language they were speaking originally. So yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they get self-conscious about it, right? And so it's harder to communicate in those aspects as well. So to your point, they just kind of let the other people talk for them, but things can get lost literally and figuratively in translation.
Of course. And to just kind of expand on that a little further, why is it so important that seniors remain involved in the decisions about their own life, their care, and even their future?
Because as we age, it's important that we are all still considered adults and have our personhood, right? And so there's definitely situations where someone is not cognitively well enough to be able to have, very in-depth conversations and whatnot, but it's still important to involve them. Even when I go and talk to folks, I've talked to a lot of people whose mom or dad or both have dementia, and they bring me in, they talk to talk to the family and them. I'm still very much speaking with the person. I know that, the kids can hear me on the peripheral. I know that they understand. I'll check with them to make sure that the information is right, but I'm talking to the person. And I've always found that gets a lot further, because specifically with dementia, right? It's often short-term memory loss, right? And so I can get into a conversation where we can kind of suss out different likes and dislikes and things like that to look at. And then plans can start being made. But I have seen it on the other, when I've been involved as well. And I show up and I had two daughters kind of yelling at each other over me and the mom, right? And it's it makes the environment so much more conflicting, and then people stop wanting to speak up, right? So it's also really important to have that autonomous individual still taking responsibility of their life, because it preserves their mental health. It gives them their confidence, right? It's about their identity and their dignity, and they can help make these choices. It might not look like the choice that for instance, an adult child wants or somebody else wants, but it's really important that they're still able to make those decisions or have a say in them.
No, for sure. And does it ever get to a point, like, as you mentioned, you'll talk to the senior directly who's most affected by these decisions? Have you ever noticed, like, maybe with their children or relatives or whoever it might be that's their caregiver at the time, do they ever cross the line in the sense? Like, there's obviously helping somebody and then there's controlling them. Like, what's the difference between that?
I would say that if you are making the decision without input or conversation, that's more of controlling that dynamic. If you're including someone, even in a decision that, maybe they don't have cognitive wellness to make, but many people do as well, is like if you're including them and you're having these conversations, I call them eldercare conversations. And although they're really hard conversations, if you can have those, then everybody is on the same page, and then you're working as a group together. You're working, in synchronicity to make sure these decisions are made properly, as opposed to just, I have family members, they just walk into a retirement home and they just decide that's the home and they get the contract and they're moving forward. That's, that's ultimate control for the adult child, because sometimes they're doing it for not great reasons, and sometimes they're doing it because conversations are not being had and the environment and the relationship is so chaotic that they just need it off their plate. So sometimes it comes from another, caregiver burnout and situations like that.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And have you also ever noticed maybe people withholding information from the seniors or elders who are most affected by this? And how can it happen in like very subtle ways, as I don't picture that being obvious all the time either?
Yeah, I have seen that. I do see when, like if we're talking about making a move to a retirement home, for instance, retirement homes can be quite expensive and they range quite a bit. And so sometimes the family will say, oh, like I know mom and dad have this money, but the mom and the dad perhaps grew up in the Depression or grew up in a time when they weren't spending that kind of money. And so when they say, mom, the rent's going to be $4,000, and mom says, no, I can't. We'll stay here. We'll move. Sometimes kids are making those decisions because they know more about the finances, and sometimes they're doing it because of that. And so it's hard to, really know if they're with, what the reason is for them withholding the information, right? Sometimes people aren't telling their loved one that they have dementia. Sometimes they're withholding that medical result. They're doing it sometimes because they think that it'll be too much information, and it might well be. And often it's because they don't want to have that conversation. So it's more, I think, like what I see is more often to keep the uncomfortableness to a reasonable level. And that's why they withhold it. So, and they do that too, even with, like seniors losing their license, for instance, right? They are not talking about it with them until something is like drastic and has to be done. Meanwhile, they've seen 6 months of, an accident or a misstep or whatever, and they're not doing anything about it until that crisis. And so if they weren't withholding that, if they were having those conversations, then the senior would be more involved. Most people don't do that because maybe they're senior, they're not, communicative, or maybe they don't want to have these conversations, or they're stubborn. And so it's a difficult situation, especially with family dynamics that are shut down with these really difficult conversations. It's hard to get that information properly. So people just kind of make decisions, and they usually wait till crisis.
We're going to take a brief break now, but when we return, we'll continue this conversation with Amy from right where we left off.
No radio? No problem. Stream us live on saga960am.ca.
Welcome back to Tips at Peel Crime Stoppers, only on Saga 960 AM. We're going to hear some more of Amy's insights on elder abuse and safety, and then I'll end this episode with a few of my own concluding thoughts. Let's get to it. And also be keeping things away from their kids too, because they want to protect them as well. And I don't want them to know that I have dementia, or I don't want them to know that my license was taken away, or whatever it is. Especially goes back to that whole feeling of maybe even shame too, or just kind of like guilt as well, as you're getting older and you don't really want to admit it 100%.
Well, you don't want to admit it, and then there's also the folks that are like, don't put me in that home, right? They don't like, I don't want to go there. And so like any quote unquote evidence that stacks up that maybe living on your own is not a great idea, sometimes seniors won't kind of say that, especially so like if they had a fall, right? It's like, oh, it's only one fall, or I got up and it's okay. And they don't think about it as a symptom. They just think about as a one-off, but more often than not, it might be pointing to nutrition or medication or balance or anything like that. And they just sweep it under the rug because they don't want to move. But I find more often than not, the ones that don't sweep it under the rug, they can address what the actual issue is, and then they may not have to actually move, right? They may be able to do something in their home, but it's a lot of miseducation on what comes next in elder care, and a lot of people are just really scared.
Yeah, for sure. And just to kind of backtrack a little bit, I know you had mentioned before how there were two sisters who were yelling over their mother and just everything with that situation. I know there can be like sibling conflict with a lot of these situations that you had briefly mentioned. I was kind of curious how like fighting for control can affect that well-being of the senior who's the center of it all.
Yeah, so triangulation is something that happens a lot where so say there's two sisters and one is like, oh no, mom wants this and mom said this, and the other sister's kind of out of the loop. It's more positioning the mom as the agreement that they have the agreement with that one sister, and it really kind of separates a family out because, it's difficult. A lot of people are trying to not make decisions that this senior, the mom in this case, don't want, and they need that kind of clear leeway to say, okay, what do you want? And so in high conflict situations for siblings, for instance, it's often more comes back to like the family roles and like what roles they have played throughout their life and what the relationship has been. And sometimes that's used as leverage, right? To say, okay, well, we don't want to do this. She wants to do that, when that might not be right. I have a family right now that have 5 siblings and their parents are living with them. And no matter what they do, the other siblings are like, no, they have to keep living with you. They're not taking into account danger and stairs and all the extra stuff that's happening. And so it comes from the other side too, where it's like sometimes with the siblings that are the caregivers and they're the closest to the parent, the other siblings like to chime in a lot. And if it's not productive, all it does is keep the one sibling kind of hands tied while the parents are declining and they feel like they can't do anything. So it comes from a lot of different angles in this situation.
Speaking of that kind of is making me think of something else here, caregiver burnout, which you had kind of touched on before as well. It's another like important conversation. As you had mentioned, stress and exhaustion, it can lead to neglect or even harmful behavior, even when somebody loves the person they're caring for. Like, how does that, would you be able to just tell me a bit more about that? Like in that situation, for example, with the 5 siblings, if like one is constantly taking care of their parent and maybe they're the closest, it can be a lot for them too at times, especially with everybody else giving their own opinion and they're not there all the time to see what's going on.
Yeah, this lady was completely stuck, right? She didn't want to make decisions solo, but because of the relationship with her siblings, she's now at the point where it's like, I got to make the decision regardless. She's got POA, it's active, and she's just making the decision. But to do that takes quite a lot of energy and effort. And most times people, by the time they're already in caregiver burnout, and caregiver burnout's really a symptom of like the whole situation, right? And it's trying to manage that. So once you get past a point of, being able to care for your loved one and being super active and getting into the zone of like exhaustion and the conversations are going round and round, people often have a bit of impaired patience, right? They lose their patience. the judgment kind of gets affected a bit, right? Because they're exhausted and they're working from like a fatigue mindset, and everything is overwhelming. Not to mention the people that are in the sandwich generation where they have kids and their parent, and like everything is on them, right? So a lot of caregivers, I find, don't have a lot of information around mental health and emotional regulation, all of those tools that people can use. And so they just burn out. And so what happens then is when they burn out, everybody's in danger. Because if they're the ones being the go-to caregiver, and then they can't get out of bed, they can't do it, they don't have the energy, they stop checking in as much, all that, everything just kind of fizzles at the same time. And so it's really important to try to stay out of it. It's almost impossible, I think, to stay out of it. What is more important, I guess, is that you recognize it as fast as possible and make sure that you're addressing it. And better yet, you build in some emotional regulation tools and boundaries and conversations so that you don't get to that point. That would be the ideal. It's just a lot of people don't know what the point looks like. And so they think they have a lot more time than they actually do.
Wow. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense at the end of the day. And are there any maybe support systems that could help make a big difference for these caregivers? Maybe when it comes to trying to balance their own well-being while also supporting a loved one that is aging?
Yeah, there's a couple support systems. I mean, there's the average of like counseling, right? Like the psychology and talking about that. There's the eldercare planners, which is a support as well of really understanding what's next, what do I have to plan for, what's going on, what's the price here, what does the government do, all of that stuff, all of that education piece. And then there's, things like respite care, which is staying for a short time, usually about a month is a minimum, 2 weeks to a month's a minimum in a retirement home. You can do it in long-term care as well. The waiting list is just much longer for it, and it takes longer to get in. In retirement homes, it's, private pay, but you can go and your loved one can be there so that you can sit and read a book if you want to, or you can go on vacation, or you can do whatever you want. They're cared for. It's a reset. We have a program even called the CARES program that I introduced a couple of years ago, which is people apply and we'll cover a respite stay for them because it's so important that people get this care. And I find a lot of the people that are really burning out, that really need this extra care, are the people caring for folks who have dementia. Because dementia doesn't go the same way for everybody. There's not really like a tried and true path that you're on. It's kind of random. It feels random anyway. And it's all down to personalities and how, what type of dementia and all the stuff. And so I find a lot of those folks need a lot more support than the system is giving them. And so there's even dementia support groups. There's the Alzheimer's Society. There's the Dementia Society here in Ottawa. There's all these extra support groups, even not dementia, like Parkinson's and things like that. There's support groups for that. And there's some for the person who has, for instance, dementia or whatnot. There's away programs, like day away programs and things like that. And then there's caregiver support groups that they can go separate to. And so, a lot of people find those, sometimes difficult to fit into their schedule, but I would say that they're a priority at that point, like really staying up on your mental health, taking care of your mental health, making sure that you don't get so far that you can't come back easily, right? Because if you think about caregiver burnout, right, it's like people wait, right? And it's so long that you have to think about going backwards and how do you get back to health? If you've gone that far into caregiver burnout and you're so fatigued and you're not being able to do anything, then the road back it can be quite long. And so catching it quicker and putting tools in sooner usually is a bit more of a benefit.
Yeah, of course. No, that was a great rundown. I appreciate that. And I know you had kind of mentioned this briefly before, just kind of how there are big decisions when it comes to seniors and elders, that it's a life at the end of the day that's pretty much, it can sometimes be in the hands of their children. Power of attorney is a huge thing, and sometimes people don't fully understand that until they're in a crisis. I was wondering if you'd be able to tell our listeners a little bit about what seniors and families should know before assigning somebody that huge responsibility, as it's massive at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you from an elder care planner, I'm obviously not a lawyer, but I would say a couple of things. One, to your point, people don't look at them until it's past the point when they need to look at them, right? And so a lot of the families that we service say, oh, I have my will. And we say, well, do you have your power of attorney? And they say, no. And so the thing is the will's great, but that's for when you're passed away, right? So it's like, it's great that it's in order, but it's not going to help me now. It's not going to help you now, because the power of attorneys for care and finance are the things that need to be online, so that which is usual, right? There's very few of us that will, just pass away in our sleep. There's going to be some sort of health episode or whatnot. There's going to be some sort of care required. And so when that's required, I've seen families struggle because there's no POAs involved, right? And so they're signing documents in hospital and doing all this stuff. And it really creates quite a kerfuffle, to be honest. And the power of attorney for, like, if you're moving into a residence or whatnot, you need all of those documents. And so it's really important that when you're doing a power of attorney, that you're doing it with someone that's trustworthy and responsible, someone that you can really count on to make decisions that are in your best interest, the senior's best interest, and not their own, right? And so these conversations really need to happen earlier than later. A lot of people, like I said, leave it too long. Like even us, we have powers of attorney as well, right? So you never know when something's going to happen, unfortunately. There's no planning in it. It's just being prudent and being early to do it. And then the other thing is too, is that if your loved one or if you have dementia, it's really important to get them in place, because once they get to a situation where, or if they're deemed incompetent of making decisions, everything's frozen at that point, is the best of my knowledge, right? They can't change the POAs. And so whatever's there is there. I've seen it happen a number of times, and it's really upsetting for the family, because something has been changed in that POA that nobody else wanted, and now that is what is happening. So it's really important to get those documents done early to make sure that you as the senior are in the best hands when it comes to your care and finances, and that you trust the person making decisions for you, and it's not just a random person, right? I've seen people not have anybody and they had to like make a last minute decision on like a friend or whatnot, which is okay, but like more thought should be put into it about who's going to handle your affairs and you as in general.
Of course. No, that's absolutely great advice for anybody dealing with that. And Amy, I wanted to conclude this conversation by asking you to tell our listeners, if they could have one takeaway about this entire conversation, what would you like to resonate with them? What would you like them to take away from this?
Yeah, I would say that, caregiving and elder care is not just like a medical or a logic issue. Like, it's not just where are we moving, what's the diagnosis and whatnot. It's really emotional and relational. And so when things start to change in families, it really does come back to what has the family dynamic been for all of these years, because you're about to see it play out again. If there's patterns and people have been doing these patterns all their life, things aren't going to necessarily change in elder care. They're going to be amplified. And so we have families that have these wonderful relationships with their loved ones. They can have conversations and it's amazing, but they're the families that don't necessarily want to have conversations because they don't want to think about their loved one getting older, right? They don't want to think about that, but they have this opening to have these conversations, and it's such a blessing to be able to do that, because on the other side, there's so many families that don't have those openings, and it's a very large struggle for them, because all these other patterns of their family dynamics come in, and people are all over the place. So it's really just important to know, like, if you have the opening, take it, and take it early, because at the end of the day, these relationships are going to play a large part in elder care, and the emotions are going to be quite heightened. So you're going to have to navigate that eventually if you're not doing it already. So as early as you can.
Yeah, no, that is a great message to leave our listeners with. And where would they be able to find you and learn more about the amazing work you do if they want to stay in touch or just connect?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you can find Tea and Toast at teaandtoast.ca. And from there, you can be hooked into the Elder Care Planners of Canada if you need someone outside of the Ottawa area. And we also have a number of free resources, downloads, and access to my book is on there as well, too. So everything is there.
Awesome. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot from you, Amy, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia. I appreciate it.
As we come to the end of today's episode, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on one of the most important themes that emerged throughout this conversation. Elder abuse prevention, it's not just about recognizing obvious warning signs. Instead, it's about recognizing people. It's about listening, about ensuring that older adults remain visible, valued, and involved in the decisions that directly affect their lives. And perhaps most importantly, it's about understanding that safety is not only physical. Safety can also be emotional, it can be social, it can be financial, and it's deeply connected to a person's ability to maintain their dignity and a sense of control over their future. Throughout today's discussion, we explored the reality that elder abuse, it doesn't always look the way we imagine it to. It doesn't always involve a criminal act, or involve bruises, threats, or obvious neglect. Sometimes it can appear as isolation. It can appear as information being withheld, or can even look like decisions are being made for somebody rather than with them. Sometimes it can happen so gradually that even the closest to the situation don't recognize what's going on until much later. And one of the most powerful takeaways from today's conversation is that good intentions, they don't always guarantee good outcomes. Families often step in because they do care. Adult children often become involved because they want to help. Caregivers often sacrifice tremendous amounts of time, energy, and emotional strength to support the people they love. Yet even in caring relationships, it's so important to remain mindful of the balance between helping and controlling, between protecting and overriding, between supporting and silencing. As people age, they don't lose the right to have a voice. They don't lose the right to ask questions. They don't lose their right to understand what's happening in their lives. And they don't lose their right to be included in conversations about their future. These principles are fundamental to maintaining dignity and respect throughout the aging process. We also discussed some of the challenges that many families face during these periods of transition, how there's moments of crisis that often require quick decision making, hospitalizations, medical emergencies, changes in living arrangements, unexpected diagnosis. These situations, they can all be very stressful for everybody involved. Because emotions, they run high, time might feel limited, and families are often doing the best that they can with the information and the time they have. But those moments are also when seniors can become very vulnerable, when their wishes may unintentionally be overlooked, when decisions move too fast, when preserving their voice requires extra time, care, and attention. That's why preparation, communication, and education are also important. The more conversations families have before crisis occurs, the better prepared they are to begin navigating difficult decisions together. Another theme that emerged today was the reality of caregiver burnout. Caregivers, they provide an incredible service. Many take on responsibilities that are physically demanding, emotionally exhausting, as well as can be financially challenging, often while balancing careers, families of their own, and even some personal obligations. Caregiving, it can be rewarding, but it can also be super, super overwhelming. And acknowledging that reality is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of honesty. Supporting seniors, it also means supporting caregivers. When caregivers have access to resources, education, and support systems, everybody benefits. The senior benefits, the caregiver benefits, and the whole family benefits. Prevention, it's not only about protecting one person. It's about strengthening the entire support network around them. Today's conversation, it also highlighted the importance of staying connected. Isolation can create vulnerability, whether it's social isolation, emotional isolation, or being excluded from important decisions. Disconnection, it can increase risk and reduce opportunities for support. A simple phone call, a visit, a conversation, checking in on a neighbor, taking the time to listen. These small actions, they can make a meaningful difference in someone's life. At Peel Crime Stoppers, prevention begins with awareness. The more informed our communities are, the better equipped we're going to become to recognize concerns, support vulnerable individuals, and connect people with the help they need. Public safety, it's not only about responding to crime after it occurs. It's about creating environments where harm is less likely to happen in the first place. And this includes protecting older adults from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. As we recognize Elder Abuse Awareness Month this June, I want us to take an opportunity to think about how we support the older adults in our lives, how we include them, how we listen to them, how we respect their choices, and how we ensure they remain active participants in decisions about their future. Because aging should never mean losing your voice. It should never mean losing your dignity or your right to be heard. Huge thank you goes out again to Amy for joining us today and for sharing her expertise, her insights, and her experience on these important topics. After all, conversations like this, they help shine a light on issues that often go unnoticed, and they provide valuable guidance for seniors, caregivers, and families. And a huge thank you goes out to all of you listeners for spending a part of your day with us. If today's episode encouraged you to have a conversation with a loved one, to learn more about elder abuse prevention, to check in on an older adult, or to even think differently about aging and caregiving, then we've accomplished exactly what this conversation was set out to do. And remember, you can find Pure Crime Stoppers on Facebook and Instagram at Pure Crime Stoppers or on X at Pure Crime Stop with 2 Ps. You can visit purecrimestoppers.ca to learn more about volunteer and sponsorship opportunities, upcoming events, archive podcasts, or to even make a donation. And when it comes to submitting a tip, never include any personal information. Crime Stoppers protects your identity so you can share what you know safely. You'll never be asked for your name, number, or email, and you'll receive a unique code to follow up on your tip. You being anonymous is what makes Crime Stoppers effective, trusted, and secure. I'm Julia Vellucci, your host of Tips by Pure Crime Stoppers. You can find me and follow my work on LinkedIn at Julia Vellucci. Thank you for tuning in, for caring, and for doing your part. Be sure to join us again next Sunday at 12 p.m. only on Saga 960 a.m. for another episode of Tips by Pure Crime Stoppers. And remember, see something, hear something, say something. Call 1-800-222-TIPS, that's 8477, and help us make Peel Region a safe place for us all. Bye for now.